We're here with Kirsten Dickins of Alzheimer's Association. She's the executive director, and today we're going to focus on the phases of Alzheimer's. For me, I jumped on it early to get the diagnosis of cognitive memory impairment. And when I mean jumped on it early, I started seeing some concerning signs of memory and behavior changes, and I went into a panic. That is when I began the process of really researching what happens after cognitive memory impairment. So, Kirsten, take this subject away.
Yeah. Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about it today, and your experiences definitely unique in that you jumped on it early. Unfortunately, we know a lot of people don't recognize signs and symptoms until maybe the disease has already progressed. And Alzheimer's disease typically progresses slowly in three general stages: early, middle, and late. And sometimes those can also be referred to as mild, moderate, and severe when we're talking in a medical context. But it's important to remember that also that since Alzheimer's affects people in different ways, each person may experience symptoms or progress through the stages differently. And sometimes it's hard to place your loved one or someone you know in a specific stage at any one time because unfortunately the stages overlap. And there may be some consistencies maybe with one stage or the other when it comes to a certain behavior. But we can definitely, talk a little bit about what you mentioned that you experienced and or when you intervened with your mother around mild cognitive impairment. So mild cognitive impairment is usually denoting those changes in cognitive function or memory that happen before you are experiencing full-blown dementia. So you have to go through the stage of mild cognitive impairment before you get to dementia, but it's important to note that some people may experience mild cognitive impairment, and maybe the cause of that is something that will not eventually progress into dementia. So it doesn't necessarily mean if you have or you will experience mild cognitive impairment that you will progress to dementia. But if you are someone who has dementia, it does unfortunately mean that you did go through that stage of having mild cognitive impairment.
Sure. And I was, you know, very hopeful that that would not progress. But then I wanted to be prepared. So that's when I
Yeah,
began the research. And then, of course, that brings out a lot of your own personal anxiety. Oh, if we get to this stage, what do we do next? So
right,
it was such a, and because my father and my mom had different diagnoses, his with Lewy body, and they had different symptoms,
right.
and dad's progressed so much faster.
Hmm.
And mom's has been very slow, which I'm happy about. So
Yeah.
yeah, preparation and then facing the reality that you were going to enter into a stage is very daunting.
Sure, and overwhelming, especially when we don't know what to expect. And so one of the things we mentioned it the last time you and I were able to visit, but it doesn't have to be an immediate death sentence, right? There's so much value that our seniors or anyone experiencing dementia still have, especially in the early stage. And so we can kind of talk a little bit about that, but I think sometimes people are confused about early stage or mild stage, because oftentimes, like we mentioned, they're getting the diagnosis of dementia when they're already entering the moderate stage or middle. So they've already passed through that early stage. And really, in early stage, it's those beginning signs. So sometimes people may not exhibit symptoms until they're in that mild stage, maybe different from your mother who you were seeing or noticing some of those things when she was not even at that point yet. She was still in the mild cognitive impairment stage. But typically, what we see in that early stage is functioning independently may be approaching that stage where you're starting to question some things. Well, is it okay if I leave them home alone because I noticed that she got turned around, or maybe she forgot where she was? But for some people, if they've got proper care, they know what they're dealing with, and they have some supportive things in place, they may still be able to drive and be a part of work, definitely a part of social activities. The common difficulties that we see are coming up with the right word or name, remembering names when introduced to new people, especially new people,
Mhm.
having difficulty performing tasks in a social setting or sometimes in a work setting, or forgetting material that was just read, losing or misplacing a valuable object, or sometimes also experiencing increased trouble with planning or organizing. So, if you're going to go on a trip or have a little outing, getting confused with, well, what do I pack? So, those are some common difficulties that we see in that early stage.
And Kirsten, we obviously just have just touched on even like the first phase, and I know that later we will continue to talk about the middle and then the last stage. And so for me, and what I want to encourage others to do, and I know it's going to be different from for each family, but because my mom and I were living in the same home, and because I could take the car and go and get all of our supplies and go to the grocery store and take to the doctor, I immediately kind of instituted, I was her Uber driver because I knew that I was planning and beginning that conversation of not driving with her. And I knew it would be a very delicate conversation. But
Mhm.
luckily for me, she got scared herself. And
Mm,
so it was easy for her to then go, okay, you can drive. She got to where she didn't want to. And the more time she didn't drive was the better, because then it was an uncomfortable decision.
sure.
Almost like, have I even forgotten how to pull out of the garage, you know?
Yeah.
So that made it easier. It will not be that way for many people. So that again, that is why the association exists. They have people to talk to you 24/7
That's right.
about how to communicate with your family regarding cognitive memory impairment to the early phase. And so please, I just always encourage everyone to call. They are an incredible resource. That's why we have them on the show. And I want to give you any closing thoughts before we wrap this up, Kirsten.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yes, no question is too light or minimal, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And I would just say it's important to remember that during the early stage for this disease, it's still possible for people to dementia to live well by taking control of their health and wellness, focusing energy on aspects of their life that are most meaningful to them. And so I love hearing about some of those pieces that you've put in place with your mom, because you can really tell that that's made a difference in easing into that transition.
Well, thank you again for joining us. I look forward to
Thank
our
you.
continued partnership and keeping this conversation going.
Absolutely. Definitely more to dive into.